In our first episode, Making of the Director, we learned about Shyam Benegal's childhood influences, which shaped his personality as a filmmaker and how he entered the world of cinema. In feature films, as in documentaries, my concerns are social, says Shyam Benegal. In our second episode, Cinema of Shyam Benegal, we are going to take a closer look at some of Shyam Benegal's films and his thoughts on filmmaking. Talking to him is noted poet and artist Dilip Chitre.
Just last year would be your Silver Jubilee with feature films.
Yes.
In this, what do you see as landmarks? I'll tell you my personal thing. For example, I look at films, as you know, in a certain way. Everybody has his own way to look at films. And I have always felt three of your films that have always fascinated me, and I take a look at them again and again, go back to them. And they are Bhumika, Kondura, and Mandi. Now, these three, to my mind, are your most successful films. In many ways, they bring out the best in you as a filmmaker. I would like you to say which of your films, looking back on the last 25 years, are you really satisfied with as your expression?
Well, frankly, I wouldn't say that I am particularly satisfied with any of them, in the sense that there is always something that is left unrealized in each one of those films. But I still feel that in most cases as far as films are concerned, from the time I made Ankur, I have realized most of my intentions in all the films. But what makes me not fully satisfied is sometimes there may be a problem in terms of the form. Sometimes it's very ordinary things. It's like saying maybe the pace of the film was not right for the subject. Things like that.
Yeah.
But overall, I would think that it's more or less fine. But I don't look back. I really don't look back to think how do I assess my earlier films. I don't like doing that because it's done. Once a film is made, it is no longer my property. The umbilical cord is cut, it goes into the world, it has its own life. And I no longer then start to make a claim on that film. So since I have consciously chosen to do that, I don't really think in those terms. But of course, there are subjects that are much closer to one than others. Now you mentioned three of my films. Now Bhumika, for instance. Bhumika is a subject that was very, very close to me. It was very close to me, like Ankur was very close to me, in which I felt that it was almost like part of me, that kind of feeling with the subject. And Bhumika was also a subject which was very fascinating for me, because you see, it was a story of a film actress, and it was based on Hansa Vadkar's life, which she had written. But it was also a certain period of the Indian cinema, from 1930s spanning through 1950s. And this was a period for the cinema where a certain kind of change took place, quite dramatic. One was that cinema, the technology of cinema, the mechanical technology of cinema improved greatly. Then films from black and white became color. All that kind of thing. And the style of filmmaking and post-war influences on the cinema made cinema slightly different from what it used to be. Of course, it's nowhere close to the kind of dramatic changes that have taken place in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Because you see, the present digital technologies that have come into the cinema or into television have totally revolutionized the way you can make films and the way you can create images. Not that, but there it was a mechanical technological change that was actually taking place. And all those things were interesting to me. Not only the story of this woman, who one might seminally call a feminist, an early feminist, but also the manner in which films used to be made. That was also very interesting. Also, I was interested in the history, the historical aspect. That is, the world is moving in a particular way. You see, because while she is involved in her own problems on a microcosmic level, the world is changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many things happening, like Second World War, 1942, different things happening in India.
It was, in fact, you chose this autobiography of Hansa Wadkar, Sankti Aika. It seems the right choice from several points of view. One of them being, there was a tremendous transformation in the film industry itself. I mean, the golden age of Hindi cinema or Indian cinema was yet to come. You were in this kind of, transitory period, the 40s.
Yes.
Which was leading up to the 50s, which was the peak period,
yes.
Let's say.
Yes.
At the same time, you had rationing, you had the World War, you had, the independence movement in a certain direction headed, and there was turmoil all around.
Yes.
And
also the great period of Kesarbai Kerkar.
That's right.
So
you have used her on the soundtrack. You have used her on the soundtrack, and you have created a period.
Yes.
At the same time, you have reversed the point of view between movie and history, movie making and history. It's like a reverse angle shot. History looking at movie makers and movie making, and looking at Hansa Wadkar as almost a kind of a representative of an era, rather than an individual woman.
Yes.
So it works on many levels.
Yes.
It's a fascinating thing.
So that was of course fairly close to me.
Yeah.
Then of course you mentioned the film Kondura.
Yeah.
Now Kondura was a film which of course when it comes to the marketplace was a complete failure.
Yeah, I know.
It was done in both Telugu as well as Hindi. Unfortunate for me that the film couldn't be made in Marathi. Because ideally I would have liked to make that film in Savanpadi, and I would have wanted to make it in Marathi.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do it simply because I couldn't find anybody to fund the film in Marathi. So it had to be done originally in Telugu and have a version of it in Hindi. But Mandi is, I think, in some ways also a turning point. Like, in the narrative structures that I had used until Mandi, it was more or less chronological storytelling patterns. There may have been differences, changes, like Bhumika was not necessarily chronologically told story. But the narrative was like that, and I had not dealt with two things. One was, I had not dealt with ensembles. I hadn't dealt with large number of actors.
Yeah.
Not having just a single character, protagonist, but having numbers of people and developing their character graphs, each one of them. Now this was to me something that seemed like a great challenge, because most films, as you know, what happens is that you have a hero, a heroine, and as a backdrop to them, you have the environment that is created, also other actors who have what one might call, they have side roles, as it were. Now, Mandi, nobody has a side role.
No.
They're each equally important to the story.
Yeah.
Now, that kind of format
It's a polyphonic kind of structure
Right.
that you have in Mandi.
Right.
And also your setting up of the scene, I'm not using the French phrase,
Yeah.
but the way you stage a scene in Mandi is remarkable. It's something very different from what you've done until then.
Yeah.
And it's something like a patentable Shyam Benegal invention. I mean, you could patent that way of setting up stage with so many characters.
Yeah.
And each one,
Yeah.
you know that Shabana and Smita are both prima donnas, and you treat them both as prima donnas in this film,
Yeah.
and they're getting some sort of joy in performing for you.
Yeah.
Now it's almost as infectious as theatre.
Yes.
Mandi has those qualities as well.
Yes.
It's remarkable from that point of view.
So it was, that changed. So I started to look at cinema slightly differently from Mandi onwards. And then, of course, the film immediately after that was Trikal, where again it was a whole ensemble concept of filmmaking. And yet I also got very interested in other kinds of filmmaking. Like, say, for instance, I went into the idea of what is the nature of truth. You see, between fact and truth, what kind of changes there are. So those things then I could start to explore later, which eventually culminated in a film called Suraj Ka Satwan, and which I'm carrying on further, until even summer. My present film, the film that I have just completed, is an extension of the same process. Because I feel that, you see, straight narratives, unless they are done spectacularly, you need to have a great deal of spectacle to do a straight narrative now. Otherwise, your response to that is only going to be stereotypical. The story, the narrative itself will seem stereotypical. The audience reaction to it will be stereotypical. So unless, when you're doing a straight narrative, you have to do a Titanic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it has to be
larger than life.
It has to be very spectacularly done. So if you can't do it when you don't have that kind of money, it allows you to deal with storytelling, with narrative patterns, schemes, concepts, allows you a great deal of inventiveness of different kinds. And here is, for instance, my latest film now, I've had to do that because I was examining, not just telling a story, I'm also examining attitudes. I'm looking at different kinds of attitudes on different levels, and this multi-layered idea has been very fascinating to me. Time is very fascinating to me, like the past, present, and the way past starts to impinge on the present.
Yeah.
And the present starts to impinge on the past, and how how these things constantly keep changing in the movement into the future. Now there are many such ideas that keep striking me and which become very interesting subjects for the cinema. You see, when I made Mammo was a script written by Khalid Mohammed.
Yeah.
Now Khalid Mohammed had done a semi-autobiographical story. Sardari Begum, which followed, was also a kind of it dealt with more or less the same kind of family. Actually, the intention has been to do a trilogy. Mammo, Sardari Begum, and third would be Zubaida. And when I finish Zubaida, you will be able to see the entire design. You see, because it's also a question of the Muslim experience.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the term minority experience. I hate the word minority, just as much as I hate the word majority. So I think here was a Muslim experience of an Indian Muslim experience in India, contemporary experience. So these three films are part of that design. Now, Sardari Begum, of course, used a great deal of music because it was the story of a Tumri singer. And it was the first time that I had paid a great deal of attention to songs and picturization of songs, which I had not paid too much attention to, although I had used them.
Yeah.
in Mandi earlier. I had also used songs in Bhumika.
Yeah.
I had done this kind of work before, but in Sardari Begum, it was used much, much more than I had ever done before.
I would like to, at this juncture, also, I would like you to talk about the making of the Mahatma, which again I think is very, very different from all the rest of your work in some ways. And in a way, it is a kind of an antidote to the Orientalist presentation of Gandhi by Attenborough. I thought this was a kind of an intellectual and spiritual retaliation of the way Gandhi is conceived by the West.
Yes. Well, obviously, you see, what happens is, it's bound to, the semiotics of it is bound to be different. When an Indian looks at Gandhi, he looks at Gandhi as part of his experience. When somebody from the West looks at Gandhi, he is essentially looking at Gandhi from the outside. So, the imaging of Gandhi is bound to be different between a person who's an Indian and a person who's not an Indian. Now, in this imaging, there are certain things that an Indian implicitly understands. It does not require an explanation for understanding. Now, the interesting part of Gandhi, to me when I made that film, because I chose that portion of his story which turned him from Gandhi into a Mahatma, which meant that it was a process by which this man developed his thinking, his philosophy, and his action, his crystallization of his political strategies, tactics, and everything, which he perfected in that laboratory of South Africa, where he was placed for 21 years. So this was very interesting to me. And also the fact that he did that with a community of expatriate Indians like himself, where the brutality of colonialism was in fact much more naked than it was in India.
Yeah.
But it was easier for an Indian, that is a westernized, educated Indian, to accept slavery was much more easy in India than it would have been in South Africa. Because here was Gandhi, who was becoming a westernized Indian and learning to be able to do well in a colonial situation. This is what he was training himself to do.
Yeah.
But then he goes through a series of experiences which he would not have had if he had remained in Bombay. And his nationalist impulses would not have developed if he hadn't gone to England.
Yeah.
So there are so many factors involved. Now this was a very important aspect of his story, which you would not have seen, if you were looking at it from the outside. If I was a Western man, I wouldn't have seen any of this. I wouldn't have noticed any of this.
Yeah.
Because the Orientalist representation always goes for what it considers as the authentic image.
That's right.
But then with the authentic image is a construct. It's not necessarily so.
Yeah.
So it is a construct. So here, because it was possible to see Gandhi is one of us, and therefore it is in many ways Gandhi's development is something not only can we recognize, then we can put ourselves in and know how it works.
Yeah.
For the experience to come through to us. And this was very important to me when I made that film.
Shyam, obviously, from this one can infer, and I have known it all along, that you lay a great deal of stress on research, and your participation in your scripts is, I think, maximum.
Oh, definitely.
And you've never left your scripts to script writers.
No, never. That I would never do. I would never leave my scripts to script writers, because to me, leaving a script to a script writer means that you are not working together. Because you see, you have a certain vision. You are making use of the talent of the script writer to flesh out your vision in terms of the script. And that is very important. If, for instance, if I know that I can do a script better than anybody else for my own film, I will do it. But when I know that I'm not necessarily the best person to do the script, I will get a script writer of great talent to do it for me. But we will walk that path together.
That's it.
You see? I mean, all credit goes to the scriptwriter, but we will have to walk that path together, because it has to be, I must know how to realize that, and to realize that I would have to internalize it. If I didn't internalize the script, I wouldn't be able to do it, which means I must have a vision about it. To go back to a much earlier thing, which is that when Satyajit Ray made Patra Panchali, I was in college. When I saw that film for the first time in Calcutta, when the film was released in Calcutta, and I saw the film, it gave me more confidence than anything before that I could be a filmmaker. Because that particular film told me that you need not make films the way everybody tells you that films are made. You see, because before Satyajit Ray, in the Indian cinema, although people did do different kinds of films, but they were all part of the same scheme of things, of the same definition of cinematic entertainment. Satyajit Ray made a film that was completely separate from all this, which meant that the kind of ideas that I had about filmmaking, it suddenly told me that yes, I can make the kind of film I want to make. I don't necessarily have to think that I must make it within the umbrella of the definition that the Indian film industry creates for you. So this was a very, very important factor in crystallizing my ambition to be a filmmaker. And the impact of that film was enormous. And I certainly learned a great deal from Satyajit Ray's films. Because not only did I enjoy Pathe Panchali very much, but also in terms of the quality of its photography, the use of sound, the use of music, his locations, the way he would locate the geography of the environment. Now, in Indian cinema, very, very few people used to pay attention to that. I mean, they didn't think it was important. Like, say, for instance, if I was to shoot a film in this room, then I must know which way people come into this room and which way can they go out. So I have to shoot it accordingly so that in the audience's mind, they know exactly where what is. Where the light comes from, where people walk in, which way they go out, where the windows are located, and so on and so forth. So this aspect of filmmaking, which Satyajit Ray was very, very concerned with and worked it so well. This is why when you saw his films, it was as though he took you there, to that place. And you could recognize, if you went into his interiors, you could recognize where books were kept, where something else was, where people came in from and where they could go out from. Now, this aspect of filmmaking, a lot of filmmakers before that never thought of. And this is something that I learned from him. You see, and later when I made a long feature-length documentary on him and his work, we discussed many of these things when I made this film on him. And I've always found that, it's these things that a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to, because it is seen as a lesser aspect of the craft of filmmaking. To me, craft of filmmaking is as important as anything else. Yeah. So there is no such thing as the mechanical craft of making a film is any lesser than the creative aspects of filmmaking.
They are not separable.
They are totally inseparable. And therefore these kind of peculiar definitions that we have been through in our country over the last 30, 40 years, particularly post Satyajit Ray, period when defining films as art films and parallel films and middle cinema and all this, which to me is a whole lot of hogwash.
Excellent.
That was cinema of Shyam Benegal. Do join us in our third and final episode of the trilogy when we will know more about his works and thoughts on television. Until then, goodbye.